the first step is acknowledging that you are not going to try to change all of your donor communications and all of the ways that you personalize things all at once.
Having more random information makes you data-driven.
Grab your phone, do a quick thank you video for donors.
Starting with what you have in hand already is a good starting point.
You're listening to The Nonprofit Boost, where Double the Donation and industry leaders share practical tips to help you grow revenue and boost corporate fundraising at your nonprofit.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Nonprofit Boost podcast by Double the Donation. You're here with me, Jaland Lim, and today's conversation is all about something that's on the minds of so many nonprofit and school fundraising teams right now, which is how to use data in a way that makes outreach feel more personal, more relevant, and frankly, more human. And who better to have on our podcast today than Lana Lincoln from Agile Consulting and Kirk Schmidt from Darkvision Consulting. And both of them bring deep experience helping organizations think more strategically about data, about systems, about supporter engagement. And you know what? I'm just really excited to dig in to what a data-first approach can actually look like in practice. So hi, Lana. Hi, Kirk. How's it going?
Hi. Thanks for having us, Jaland.
No worries. Super excited to have this conversation. And you know what? Let's kick it off. So, you know what? I think this topic can sometimes sound a little abstract because a lot of organizations say they want to be data-driven. But that can also mean a lot of different things depending on the team, their tools, and the goals. So to start us off, when you think about a data-first approach to a modern donor engagement, what does that actually mean for a nonprofit or school that wants its outreach to feel more like a personal conversation than a mass message?
So I think one of the main things that has always been true is the more information about the donor that you can use, where they can see themselves in that conversation, the better. And it can be something as simple as not writing "Dear Friend," which is something that's still a lot of charities will do when they send out pieces of mail, to taking other information about their giving history, about their preferences, things like that, and using it in those communications. Obviously, there's you can go to the nth degree of what type of information you capture, and you have to worry about privacy and all sorts of things around that. Quite often, the first steps are just really focusing on the data that you do have and employing it in the communications you have with the donor.
And I think when you think about being data-driven, the goal there is to really know your people, know your audience, know your constituents, your donors, your partners, and your supporters, not just what they give, but who they are and how they engage with your organization in the many different ways that they do. So, like Kirk said, that comes back to using the data you have and making sure that it's clearly tracked and organized so that you can actually make sense of it. So it's not just collecting a bunch of random data points, it's actually having data that your organization can use and understand to translate into a better understanding and deeper relationships with real humans, not just notes in a CRM, but an actual understanding of who your supporters are and how they engage with you, because that's going to enable you to build stronger relationships and for them to become stronger allies of your organization as well.
Right. I love those answers that you gave. They're like very practical. But while we're on that note, what do you think organizations often misunderstand about the whole concept of being data-driven?
One of the things that is often misunderstood is that having more data, having more random information makes you data-driven. Because if you are just collecting tons and tons of unrelated data about your donors, but not using it for anything, it can actually create more clutter and more to wade through and more inaccuracies in your understanding of your donors. Whereas if you're building a specific focused data, a comprehensive data set around your donors and supporters. So I think that's a big thing. It's not just more is more, it's quality over quantity, which is, common throughout fundraising. both Kirk and I were fundraisers for a really long time. So we have done a lot of work on building quality relationships, quality around donors, not just quantity of information that you're collecting.
The thing I think I see a lot of people do is they want to believe that they are data driven until the data puts them into an uncomfortable place. Whether it is, something that they believed was true or were taught was true about fundraising and isn't in your particular organization or your particular situation. And so one of the key facets of being data driven is you have to be uncomfortable with being wrong and letting the data tell you the story. And it doesn't mean you can't question the data, because sometimes the way that you collected the data, or the theory behind it, or the even the conclusions may be based on things that are biased. But in general, you have to be willing to accept that the data is telling you that what you thought your entire career is wrong, and you have to actually pivot based on that. And that's a really hard place for a lot of people to move to.
And,
Right.
but it's also very exciting, because once you're getting those, if you're open to that learning and that shift in thinking around your data, it's an opportunity for you to build newer and better and stronger ways of engaging with your community. So you can find out that this demographic doesn't like giving online. They appreciate a phone call, even though everything tells you online giving is easier and more direct, and everyone wants to give, and you have this new door opened of how to engage with them. So I think, being open to that feedback and learning from your data is definitely a big opportunity.
I love it. Just like a few minutes into the episode, and you're already dropping these truth bombs, like these really big revelations that, you know what? That will make a lot of nonprofits and schools stop and think. And to that, I totally relate to what you guys are saying on data, that it's not just collecting more, because at the end of the day, data could also be a danger. There is a responsibility that these nonprofits hold, of course, when they have all this data of their supporters, their donors, and the trust that they have to build should be something that they need to protect and be very wary to not break, just in case of a data leak or something similar. And in our case, like in Double the Donations case, I think what comes into play is not just more data, but rather meaningful sets of data, wherein it is important to know a lot about the supporters, the donors, but it's also what you do with that. And in our case, going beyond just their name, just the gift amount, and going into their workplace affiliation really helps, because that's where you unlock these additional sources of revenue, these workplace giving insights. And it actually also empowers these donors to act on their own and to just extend the impact that they have. And I think that's the framing that we all have coming into this conversation, which I see as something that is also very practical and rather a pretty simple thing to do if you really pare it down to the basics. But I think the challenge for a lot of teams, once they do have this data, is figuring out which of these data points are actually worth paying attention to. Because most organizations are not struggling with a total lack of information. I mean, with all the ways we could scrape data right now, how easy it is to reach supporters, whether it's through an online form, through a phone call, through a text message, through an email. There's actually a lot of data that we could gather, but what nonprofits are struggling with is the focus. And when it comes to creating these more relevant donor engagement, what are the highest value data points nonprofits and schools should focus on collecting? And well, how can they tell the difference between data that's actionable versus data that's just, interesting to have?
So I think from a donor perspective, it's less about the information that you think is important, but more the information that can absolutely ruin a relationship with a donor. And that really comes down to how the donor wants to be communicated with and identified. So their gender and how they present, what pronouns they use, how they say their name, how they spell their name. Like if you want to ruin a donor relationship, get those wrong, and you will absolutely not hear from a donor again. And so there's those key pieces about that piece of the donor. And then from my experience, the information that really does matter the most actually is patterns of giving. So it comes down to, when do people want to give? How much do people tend to give? What is important to them when they do give? And those pieces become the actionable pieces of, when do you approach the donor? What opportunities do you present to them? What information do you tell them more about? What information do you tell them less about? Recently, and we're recording this just after Mother's Day. Recently, I saw a person talking about some companies have started offering the ability to opt out of communications on particular holidays, because Mother's Day may be a particularly difficult holiday for many people for many reasons. And to be able to say, look, send me your marketing stuff, but just don't send me stuff around Mother's Day, because like it's triggering for particular reasons. That type of information is really important when you think about creating a relationship with a donor that can last.
Yeah, I think that kind of feedback in general, like not just passively absorbing information from your donors, but getting their direct insight on what they want to hear about and what they don't, is so valuable. And it shows that you value that relationship enough to make it exactly what they need and meet them where they're at. So I think that that is something that, as a sector, we can be more bold in asking what people, how they want to be communicated with, and what our supporters do and don't want to hear about. If you think about it, every time you buy something in a store or stay at a hotel, you're getting a feedback survey immediately. Like, how was your interaction? Do you want to be on our email list? Do you want to, do you want to unsubscribe? And I think we can be a little more active with that in just checking, like, how are we doing? Getting a pulse check. How is this going? What would you like to hear about? What's valuable for you? And I think that can make a stronger connection in the long run. And will help us, and can also help us segment what we do and don't communicate.
Nonprofits are always being asked to do more with limited time and resources. Double the Donations virtual summits offer practical insights, expert advice, and actionable ideas to help you grow your impact. Check out the summit calendar and register at doublethedonation.com/virtual-summits. We'll see you there. I love it. Like, really interesting insights. I've just been nodding here, and that really does make all the difference. Like, those little data points that show that you care, that you listen. And Lana, you actually mentioned something about the urgency, the timing of when you get that feedback, when you get those data points. So how important do you think is that timing? Is there a particular time window when it's best to get a certain data point, when it's best to reach out or whatnot?
Well, I will actually put this one to Kirk, because you have done a ton of donor surveys and data analytics. So what's your take on when to ask?
I don't know that there's a bad time to ask, as long as it's within, probably within the year of somebody giving. So there's a lot of organizations who will do annual surveys. An organization I was with, we used to send it out in the summer every year, and we always got great feedback then. I think the tools now exist to be able to capture maybe some of that feedback right after the donation is made. And, you might not want a long survey, but you might want to ask a question or two. And especially, there are systems that you could ostensibly create questions that it won't ask the same question twice. So once you have an answer, if it recognizes the donor, it now asks a new question, and you slowly build a body of knowledge around the donor. So I think there's some opportunity there. But really, if you're asking within the year and you're asking questions that make the donor feel like what they are telling you will be actioned upon. And I think that's key. Like, do not ask a question that you're not going to do anything with, because again, that's going to sour the relationship. But I don't think the timing matters as much. maybe when people are like, you might want a survey when people are complaining about something that might be more prescient at that moment. But I think most donors are happy to just give you feedback when you are ready to ask for it.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was just gonna say you'll hear from the the big fans and the people with big complaints, not so much from the middle, and that's okay. That's like those are the opinions that you want to hear because the folks in the middle are happy and trucking along. But yeah,
I will add to that though. I've worked with a lot of organizations who will change how they do things because they've received a few complaints. And having come from the annual giving world, you kind of know that if you get a lot of complaints, you're probably also getting a lot of money. like there's a level of consider how many complaints is a reasonable amount. If you've sent out 50,000 pieces and you get 50 complaints, that's really nothing.
Yeah, it's all relative, right?
It feels like a lot, and especially when some of those emails go to the CEO and the CEO wants this actioned and all of those things. But it's very important to consider in context how much complaining is actually happening and whether or not that is true for all donors or just true for those 50 that felt compelled to call in.
Yeah, I really love those points. Like, I think those are simple and actionable, yet it's something that organizations wouldn't think about often. And it's really good to have these conversations that bring these points that seem so obvious, yet aren't, into light. And since we already do know what kind of data matters, what kind of data is actually a great plus for donors to feel like they're seen, they're heard, and of course that their complaints or their criticisms or their praise is something actionable and is something that the company is working on. And the next hurdle, I think, would be turning that insight into something the team could actually use. Because I'm pretty sure these teams hear so much noise. And as you've said, they come from all directions. They can be huge complaints. They can be like little pats in the back. They can just be some donors just cruising by and you don't really know a lot about what they're thinking in their head. And that's where the gap often shows up. These teams, they have the reports, but not always a repeatable action plan. So a lot of organizations they of course have their dashboards, their exports, their reports, but that doesn't automatically translate into more personalized communication. So what does an actionable framework look like for taking the right data and actually using it well so teams can, segment, prioritize, and personalize outreach in a way that's realistic, especially if they're working with limited staff or limited time?
I think that's a really good call out to acknowledge that we all know, like working in nonprofits, everyone's wearing many hats. You are incredibly stressed. No one needs another full-time data project that you're going to do off the side of your desk. I don't think that is feasible or a good approach for anybody. And I think sort of going back to the beginning of our conversation, starting with what you have in hand already is a good starting point. Look at the data you have about your donors and is it organized in a way that you can take those steps? Is it organized in a way that you can do simple mass personalization like first name, giving level, giving time that they gave to or campaign that they gave to in the past? Can you segment and personalize communications based on characteristics and data points that you already have before you start boiling the ocean with finding more data and more ways to publicly share that you're respecting this data. So I think looking internally first and making sure that that is cleaned up and having processes around data maintenance and hygiene are a great place to start because that in turn sets you up, lays the foundation for you to do simple personalizations that can mean a lot. When I get an email that says, hi, Lana, thank you for your gift to this event last year. It's coming up again. I know that even if they don't know me personally as a human, that organization is respecting where and how I gave and sharing information that's relevant to me. And that doesn't mean collecting more. It just means using what you have and making sure that what you have is usable. So I think that's a really good place to start that maybe isn't as daunting as a whole data overhaul.
I think a big thing to remember is most donors aren't marketers. Most donors don't look at the same um, annual giving copy all the time. They're not looking at the same receipt copy all of the time.
Yeah.
You can do little tweaks that feel more personal, even if they on your side don't feel personal. And so an example is 20 years ago, I worked for a cancer organization, and the receipt template that we had on the background had just a whole bunch of if thens. And it was, if they gave to brain cancer, here's a paragraph about the work we are doing in brain cancer. If they gave to renal cancer, here's a paragraph about that. Whatever those are. And you've basically created personalization from the level of this is what they gave to, so this is the information we're going to give them. And it doesn't necessarily say that, like, I know that Bob has 3 kids and 2 dogs and all of these things, but you're providing the information that you have to say, like, look, we at least know who you are and know what is important to you, which goes a long way.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think of that also. Your point about we see everything so much internally as an organization. I remember having a conversation about a campaign, and we were going to share a family story about one of our patient families, and the feedback was, "Oh, we shared their story so much, we can't use this story again." But it was only to us that we had seen that story over and over because we had reviewed it so many times for a completely separate campaign that wouldn't touch this group of donors. So they may not, this was a fresh face, a fresh story to them. And so once we sort of recognized our own internal bias, it actually made it a lot easier. We didn't have to go back to the drawing board and create a new story. We just needed to reframe this for a different group. So, yeah, be aware of your own. Yeah, the things that you see all the time are not
Yeah.
what your donors are seeing all the time. Their perspective is very different. Um, and that means that every interaction is a chance for you to build on that, and you don't have to necessarily start from scratch every time.
And there's also that level of you only have to be better than the other charities that they are dealing with, right? Like if they're dealing with a charity that has massive amounts of personalization, you're not going to win that if you don't have the time or the ability to curate all of the data around that. But
Mhm.
so many charities do send out the dear friend, and they don't talk about the particular things that the person gave to and that type of thing. You're making a major difference just by adding the information that you do have.
Yeah, just by thinking about it
Yeah.
at all, just by thinking about them as people. And maybe that's another like easy action as well. I think that was the original question. Is I realized recently on a lot of the organizations that I give to or sign up for newsletters, I always get asked how I heard about them, but I don't often get asked why I'm giving to them. And I just realized that that was an interesting gap. And maybe that's an opportunity too to find just an easy question to add to your donation form to say why are you supporting us today? Because I think someone's why can be really insightful, valuable information um, that can help you segment later down the road. If you find out because they had a friend who went through a certain condition or treatment, or because they liked your ad, or because they heard a story about someone, like you can find what's resonating. And I think that understanding someone's why can give you some really powerful points for connection later down the road as well.
I love it. Like, I think those insights really hit home for us and for me as well, because as you guys said, and we have established like time and time again in this conversation, it's not always about the more, but it's always about understanding the why, the how, and all those other things. Like, it's not always about gathering, but it's always about utilizing and understanding, because the goal is not always just to know more about supporters, but it's to use what you do already know about them to send messages that are relevant to them, to their person, to their cause that they're supporting, or to their backstory, as you guys have mentioned. Because I think in our field of work, or in the clients that we do talk to, this really does apply to how we approach employment-based eligibility for matching gifts as well. And it's just one example of this like really, really broad principle. I mean, you guys are talking about, of course, donors and volunteers, and I'm here talking about matching gifts. But of course, at the end of the day, it is a principle that really does apply to everyone. And in one of our clients, well, Main Public, it's a useful reminder that the challenge is not always donor intent, because they do have their why. They do have these reasons why they're giving, but it's almost always donor awareness. If they're aware of these opportunities to give more, of these workplace giving eligibilities that they do have with their employers. But we realize and we notice that once we do make that matching gift information easier to access to them, they identify more, or rather, Main Public was able to identify more than $52,000 in a year, and they saw a 69% open rate in their follow-up emails. So again, these donors, these volunteers, these supporters, they want to give, but it's on us to make it easier for them to give, because there really is that donor drop-off that we say whenever a process is too hard or too hidden for them to access. And well, for those listeners who are hearing this and thinking that, you know what, all of this makes sense, whether on which side of fundraising you're in. But for those organizations that have a lean team and they can't rebuild their systems overnight or make an overhaul of their structure, well, I just want to make sure that we leave them with another practical place where they can begin. So we do acknowledge that not every organization has the same starting point. They're not starting from the same place. They're not starting with the same logistics or staff or time on their hands. And for many, this progress is going to start with a few smart changes rather than one massive transformation. So if a nonprofit or school wants to make its donor communications feel more personal over the next few months, what's the best first step that they should try to take in the next 30 to 60 days?
The first step is acknowledging that you are not going to try to change all of your donor communications and all of the ways that you personalize things all at once. There are small things that you can do for smaller pockets that allow you to not only better refine how you do it, but also test how it works, also see what the results are. Again, like coming from an annual giving world, you really don't want to do a mass change to everybody all at once, because if it goes the wrong way, you've just poisoned your entire donor pool. So starting small, being able to take information that you have access to, not necessarily stuff even in your own system, but information that is just publicly available can be a really good place to start and to experiment a bit.
I think that testing with like a small test patch, just like when you're painting a house, try a small test patch first and see how it goes, both for the response you get, but also for your team. Was this a huge lift? Was this so much effort for not enough reward? And then I think your thoughts on corporate giving also made me think about how you would want to be treated as a donor and a human. What matters to you? What doesn't matter to you? And think with your team, what does that look like? Because that'll give you some ideas of what is the most valuable to focus on. And on the corporate giving front, I think there's a big opportunity for nonprofits to be a valuable partner to their donors as well. It's not just that you are asking your donors and supporters for more time, money, and attention, but if you are showing them a way to amplify their impact, so connecting them with corporate giving opportunities that maybe they didn't know existed, that's a powerful tool. If I heard that as a donor, I would be like, of course I'm going to jump on this. I want to get as much support for this cause that I care about as I can. So thinking about how you can empower your donors to do their best work and help them as well, not just how they can help you. And for the corporate side as well, it's really powerful to have that information to go to your corporate supporters and say, hey, did you know that 20% of your staff give to our cause? This is amazing. Like, your team is incredible. We would love to work with you in a bigger way. So I guess that wasn't a very clear answer, but just building on to what Kirk said, yeah, start with test patches and think about other areas where you can be a valuable partner to your donors, and what you'd like to learn from your data in doing that.
Wow. So, I mean, you guys have shared so many practical yet actionable insights, but I'm pretty sure our listeners it wouldn't hurt our listeners rather to hear one or two more. So let's end with something quick and practical that they can take back to their teams like right away as soon as they stop on this podcast. But I suggest that you guys watch and listen to the next episodes as well. But so Kirk and Lana, this can be one data point, one habit, or one simple tactic. So to wrap it all up, what's one donor data point or one personalization tactic you think every nonprofit or school should review this month? So we can have one from each of you.
Sure. So right now, Canada is going through its census that we do every 5 years. So I think a lot about census data, and I think a lot about names. If you were to go and take some videos, and I'm not talking about like highly, post-produced videos, but just like grab your phone, do a quick thank you video for donors. The United States, 60% of the United States has one of 550 last names. 550, or sorry, first names. 550 first names make up 60% of the United States. So you could record 550 videos and ostensibly send a video to 60% of your donors, thanking them for their gifts.
Personalized video without making personalized
and they don't
video.
know that you're talking with 20 other Trishas. All they know is they received a video saying, "Hey Trisha, thanks for that gift." Really easy thing to do, and it's just based on how names are distributed.
Kind of reminds me of those personalized pens.
Yeah,
like the name labels, names, and you know what? There's sort of one for everybody if you just browse through.
Yeah. They never had my name. I'm sure they never had yours either, Shalane. No.
Never had mine.
I think I would require an extra personalization step.
Yeah, we'd be the extra video crew. But yeah, that's a great tip. And I'd say once you have done something like that, make sure you have a process in place for how you're going to save it and keep it accessible and usable going forward. So look at your internal processes of how you're tracking and managing data, and just do a quick cleanup on here's the naming format for how we name these files. Here's where we save these things so that everyone is comparing apples to apples, and it can reduce some of that administrative load of going person to person saying, hey, do you have that Trisha video? Or do you have that email we sent out last year? Just looking at how you're managing and tracking things internally. I mean, a lot of the work we do with our clients before we even set up their new system is just that internal cleanup. So I think it's that concept of cleaning your room before you go out and conquer the world. It'll set you up and your team up so that you're able to do personalization and segmentation, and also everything that's coming out now with AI. All of that is easier and more successful if you're able to have a solid, standardized foundation internally.
I love it. And well, that's how you personalize data. I love how all of these, because I think at the start of this conversation, some people would come into the episode and think that data is something that's very hard, it's very streamlined, whereas personalization is something that's very connected to the human side of things. So it's kind of how do you reconcile these 2 points? And with everything that you guys have shared, there are obviously a lot of ways to do it. There are also a lot of benefits to whoever does it, whether you may be a huge nonprofit, whether you may be someone starting out, whatever leadership role, or rather whatever role you have in the organization. It's something that they can use. It's practical and it's actionable. So Lana and Kirk, thank you so much for what has been such a helpful conversation. And I really appreciate, as well as our listeners for sure, really appreciate how clearly you've connected this big picture strategy with practical day-to-day work that nonprofit and school teams are actually managing. And thank you so much for joining us. That was the Nonprofit Boost by Double the Donation. The episode was the data-first approach to modern donor sorry. Let me repeat the outro, okay? So, thank you so much, everyone. That was the Nonprofit Boost by Double the Donation. You were listening to me, Jaland Lim, together with Lana Lincoln and Kirk Schmidt, and the episode was the data-first approach to modern donor engagement. So to anyone listening here, well, you better apply everything that these guys have shared because they are simple, they are actionable, and overall, we just hope that this has been helpful to you guys, and we'll see you next time. Bye!
Here's your next steps. Visit doublethedonation.com to explore the tools and strategies that schools and nonprofits use to unlock more revenue through corporate fundraising. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe and share the video with your team and peers.